think we're live. We'll give just a few minutes for everybody to join. I think we're still dealing with delays. Okay. Well, welcome back to our introduction class for Wednesday evening. Hopefully, we will not have any storm-related outages or delays this evening. So last night we were thrown offline briefly because of a snowstorm, and while most of us are thawing out here in Oregon, there are large swatches of the state that are very much like Texas that have no power yet. So we are very lucky up here in the Portland metro area that for the most part things are coming back to normal. So if you're not from this area, we get snow, but it's usually at higher elevation. So the city generally doesn't see very much. Every few years we'll get a big dump of snow that hits the city. So this year has been one of those years. So we've, while it's very beautiful, and those of you from Canada and East Coast would laugh at the amounts, but the city doesn't have salt or snow removal equipment. So when you add hills, and it's fun. So thank you everybody for joining us and overcoming whatever weather-related challenges you may have in your area. So tonight I thought I would talk about a topic I actually talked about looking at my notes. I think it's been about 5 years ago. I had a few questions this week from people, and I think the questions were pretty typical of people who are approaching Shingon. So one of the misconceptions, I should say, people sometimes get the wrong idea because the vast majority of information written about Shingon Buddhism, available in Western languages, is written from the perspective of academics. And so they are generally distinguishing one school from another or finding a small difference between the school or something quite unique and, magnifying that, which is, really good for your academic research, but it doesn't necessarily give the right perspective on, what is it that you're going to find when you walk into a Shingon temple? What does the community look like? A variety of things of that nature. And I think this extends to, you look up the Wikipedia article for Shingon, and it lists these very esoteric texts and says, these few texts are the core to understanding the school of Buddhism. And then people are quite shocked when I say, you're not going to be helped very much reading those as a starting point. So that bears explanation. So in the coming classes, I'll try to explain that a little bit and put some of those ideas into context. But that's one of the perspectives. So when I get questions, the other question is that people, again, coming from, I think, writings that are the focus of academia, will have a perception that Shingon is not at all accessible. In fact, one of the questions I got this week was, whether there's any lay practice at all within Shingon. And I had to, it was email, so I was vigorously shaking my head yes. So I was like, I have to write it. But yes, absolutely. There's lay practice. Of course, here in the United States, if my math is right, we have almost 20 temples, Shingon temples. Of course, the majority are in Hawaii, someplace that doesn't have to worry about snowstorms knocking out their power. But those temples do exist. There used to be more for various historical reasons. We have fewer, but all of those temples are focused on the needs and interests of local people. They are not those interests, those needs, that perspective, that daily practice doesn't make it into the writings of academics. And so we have this huge, I think, gulf between the reality of the day-to-day and what you can find in written form. So to try to fill in some of those gaps, that's part of the purpose of this class. And also to make sure that we don't get, as much as I encourage people to study, that we don't kind of lose track of what we're doing. And here's why. Looking at only those sort of academic writings, while the Buddhist tradition has, some of the deepest philosophical writings, perspectives, arguments, incredible minds, that's a small component, and I think doesn't really reflect the day-to-day beauty of what you'll see of the tradition and practice. Those articles, those writings, the things that we do have more readily available, don't talk about the happiness of arranging flowers and offering them to the Buddha. They don't go in depth about the life-changing experience that comes from pilgrimage. They don't talk about the simple beauty of offering incense and how meaningful that may be to people. And I think especially right now, given our travel interactions are still greatly limited by the ongoing pandemic, often what we need more than anything are those simple actions, that simple pure beauty, and to remind ourselves that in the course of our life, those topics in the academic papers may be relevant to some aspects of our interests, but on a day-to-day basis, we have to find a way to kind of connect this teaching to every footstep, every word, every small action in our life. So while I will talk about some of these bigger philosophical concepts from time to time, tonight, we're going to talk about one word, and that word is joy, because I think, I look at some of the questions I get, people find the path to be quite daunting. Either how do I start a practice and keep it going? How do I practice when I'm, alone doing this practice? How do I, find a practice center because I'm in a very remote area or not close to any, current center? How do I find a connection in the midst of a pandemic? So if those are the actual things we're facing, those academic articles, as dry as they are, as technical as they are, may actually kind of send us spinning into a place where we don't see spiritual practice as a happy thing, something that we want to do. Rather, we may begin to view it as some insurmountable obstacle or a goal that we can't achieve or something that's out of our grasp. And that's not the case. That's not the whole story, but I think that topic is missing more often than not. So tonight we're going to talk about joy. And if you're interested specifically, I created this kind of outline or topic from the Molokarti Sutra. So several years ago, we went through the Molokarti Sutra, and there's a whole section in there that discusses joy. And I think it bears revisiting, not only because we've begun the Lunar New Year, so we're officially into the year of the ox, and we all need joy in our life, but I think we need to balance our practice, our viewpoint, with some joy. And if you've been affected by some of the bad weather, I have some friends who didn't have electricity for more than 5 days. They needed a little bit of joy. They didn't have the electricity to read academic papers. So if you find yourself separate from good and wise spiritual advisors, you can probably use some joy. So that's our topic this evening. I will have an outline, so I'll put it up on screen. So I've got a camera here, and I've got some notes over here, and I've got all of you over here. From time to time, I forget to take the outline down, so you're not just looking at a few sentences. So bear with me as we continue to learn and utilize new technology. But this will be our topic. So what do we mean by joy? I think it's fair to ask that question first. And Merriam-Webster Dictionary defines joy from a secular standpoint as the emotion evoked by well-being, success, or good fortune, or by the prospect of possessing what one desires. So when we get what we want, we experience joy. So that is the general definition. And sometimes I like to reflect on simple joys. So think back to when you were a child, or if anybody here still considers themselves in the child realm. I have an inner child, and I let my inner child out to play quite frequently. So if your inner kids are running around tonight during this talk, that's good. But what brought you joy when you were young? Probably very simple things. I remember I wasn't really big on candy, but animals, any animal, I would just, be super happy. Swimming, huge smile on my face. Just being able to run around was pretty much all I needed to experience joy. It was before video games, so kids today probably need more, or think they need more. But when we look at this, getting what we desire component, we may, depending on our perspective on the Buddhist teaching, say, oh, well, isn't the Buddha saying that, desire is why we don't have joy? This is the obstacle, in fact, to spiritual practice. So I think when we talk about joy tonight, we'll give a bit of a different perspective on some of these issues, and expand and broaden our definition of joy. Because who doesn't want joy? So I will put this on screen for you. Let's see. Okay. So it starts off with just the basic definition, possessing what one wants. But there is a spiritual definition of joy also. And we have to, I think we should ask questions of the teaching. So is it appropriate for a spiritual path to teach or to discuss joy? Or should joy only be understood through pleasure? Right? If joy is not just one thing, should we limit it? Should we change the definition, the secular definition? Or should we understand it as a broader, much bigger thing? So for the purpose of tonight's talk, we will understand joy as the result of a whole host of different factors. And the first one, and this comes from of Molokarti teaching. Joy is to always trust the Buddha. What does that mean? I have to find you guys again here. Oh, stop share. Everybody went away. So where's it? Okay. So what does it mean to always trust the Buddha? There's an element of faith being discussed. But faith in the Buddhist tradition is faith based on investigation and practice. So although it comes first in this list of things that bring joy, it's something that you may have a better understanding of at the end of the class. So faith is critical, but it's not a prerequisite for starting. It's maybe when you take your vitamin and there's a capsule, right? It's the outside capsule. All the grains of vitamin are the real ingredient, but something has to bind it together. So that is, from our perspective, we would term it faith. So the next thing on our list after faith, let's see here. Is joy is a desire to hear the Dharma. So if you need to learn and practice first, then hearing the teaching is the next logical step. So generating a mind of joy rather than a mind of drudgery. So coming to the teaching with put some energy into it, listening in a manner that is not, like dragging a heavy weight is probably a good way to put it. What type of listening to the Dharma do we have? Of course, this lecture is one. Chanting the sutras is another. Sutra recitation, listening to it is another. Even hearing the bell in the temple is listening to the Dharma. I think there's many forms here. In the sutras, it says we can eventually hear the Dharma in all things, including in the wind of the trees, and the water, and the birds. So do we see it, understand it that way? Or do we just shut the window so we can more easily hear our television? So hearing the Dharma is not just the lecture, right? It's an actual ongoing process of trying to open ourselves up to joy in all aspects of our life. The next part says joy is to make offerings to the assembly, to the Sangha. So traditionally, of course, this meant making offerings to the monks and nuns when they were out alms gathering. It has a broader perspective too. So the first step, right, the 3 jewels being the first step of the path and the basic of Buddhism, basic foundation. So how do you become a Buddhist? How do you become a Buddhist? Is taking refuge in the triple jewel. So it's not only the basis of your practice, but it's the motivation for kind of turning the corner, cultivating goodness, having a stable structure with which to turn for instructions, support. So here, making offerings to the assembly is supporting the triple jewel, supporting the Dharma. If we don't have a way to meet, if we don't have a way to disseminate the teaching, if we don't have something to rely on in difficult times, then it's impossible to do our practice. So by coming together, right, we are supporting the practice, we're supporting the Dharma. So your presence here tonight is supporting the Dharma. If you didn't show up, then I wouldn't talk about the topic. So by actually logging in, right, you're actually supporting in a way. So the teaching goes on and says the joy is also to transcend the 5 desires. So here we get to that struggle where we all admit, but we like desire. Desire can be fun. What's wrong with desire? And it's not that there's anything necessarily wrong with it. And I think the word here is probably a good one, to transcend. You can experience enjoyment from various things, but always ask who's in control, right? Is the thing in control or are we in control? And that's one of the critical deciding factors, right? Do we have the ability to distinguish when something is eating up too many of our brain cycles or, changing our normal behavior? So traditionally, the 5 desires are wealth, sex, fame, food, and laziness. Pretty much what people get. I saw a headline today. Someone sent me. Someone was making lots of money by sleeping and then live streaming them sleeping on the Twitch streaming network. So we sometimes overindulge in one of these 5 things, right? Wealth, sex, fame, food, laziness, or we chase after those things disproportionately. So we all need these things, or we're created by these things. So that it's not that there's anything inherently wrong with them. It's more of looking at, are they in balance? Is our entire life focused on these things? Do we have any other outlet or interest? Or are we controlled by one of these things? I recall several years ago, a good friend of mine was changing jobs. And as he changed jobs, and it was his last day, I went to help him move out, unpack his office. So he's like, can you give me a hand with the boxes? I said, oh, no problem. So the owner of the company called him in and said, you really have to think about making more money. And have you thought about how you're going to make more money? And he went on to provide a long list of not so wholesome activities by which to make money. And then went on to brag about how he had made money in those less than wholesome industries. And my friend was rather shocked. At the time, he was very quiet, and I thought, oh, maybe he's taking this seriously. And when we got outside, he kind of let off some steam about how disappointed he was to have those suggestions made to him. So those desires, wealth, sex, fame, food, laziness, you can also think of them philosophically as your bodily senses, right? Sight, hearing, smell, taste, and touch. Does one have more control than another? Is one kind of pushing us in a certain direction? Are we in control of it or not? Are we fully aware? So it's guarding our bodily senses so that we have a better understanding of where we are. When those things are guarded, we have joy because we don't find ourselves off in a direction that we didn't really realize. So in the Molokarti Sutra, it says, joy is to contemplate the 5 Skandas as vengeful bandits. So it's very, very helpful and colorful language, right? So Skandas in Sanskrit, we should understand as some manifestation of ourself that is wholly based on our bodily needs, right? We are more than our body, especially as human beings. Right? We are not 100% focused on just instinct, or at least we should be more than just instinct. But if we do let one of our bodily needs sort of take over completely, then we're off track. I think a good way to view this is, because it's sometimes hard to see from a day-to-day perspective, but if we're ill and something is hurting or something's not working, right? We've lost our sight or our hearing, our vision, or as happens with coronavirus, a lot of people, I've known a few people who've gotten it now, and they said it's very scary to lose their sense of taste. So when we have that experience, right, the inverse, then all of our focus and attention goes to that. All of our brain cycles, all of our conversation is that. I knew one person who had it, and regular updates were, I can't wait until I can taste food again. I just wish I could taste food again. the opposite is true as well. Sometimes we are just 100% focused on, getting the best tasting thing, and very disappointed when we don't have the best tasting thing, or if it's not up to our standard. So we can get, off. So when those things are in balance, that's where we have joy. So when we find that we are having a tough time in life, we have to take the time to give consideration to, where's our focus, where's our attention. That will often give us a good indication of what is out of whack and how to get our joy back. Joy is to contemplate the four elements as poisonous snakes. Ooh, I love this language. Okay, why should we view them as poisonous snakes? What are the four elements first? Earth, air, fire, water, etc. So in the ancient times, people thought of the world and everything in it in terms of these four elements. Why is poisonous snakes? Because they're ever changing, right? Just like a snake is constantly coiling and changing its shape and moving, these elements are always changing. And not that they are, for us to turn away from the world completely. It's for us to take pause. Years ago, I saw my first rattlesnake, and where I grew up in Michigan and the Midwest, we don't have rattlesnakes. When I came out here to the West, I was on a hike and I saw my first rattlesnake. And of course, being the typical, just stereotypical person who sees a rattlesnake for the first time, I got out my phone and leaned in and tried to get a picture, which was don't do that. That's not what you should do. And the people with me on the hike said, you have to be very careful, rattlesnakes in this area. And I said, oh, it's only a baby. It's actually the babies are more poisonous than the adults, which I did not know either, because I never actually seen one. So this is why. So give us pause. It's not that there's anything wrong with the rattlesnake. He has a part to play in our ecology. And Mr. or Mrs. Snake went on about her business after I passed by. But the nature is ever changing. So if we either fear everything because it's changeable, that's not quite the right perspective. Or if we hold on too tightly, not recognizing things will change, that is a misguided perspective also. So we have to have balance, right? Our balance is, we know there may be snakes, we're still going to go for our hike. If we see or hear one, we'll give them, plenty of space. Don't lean in with your phone and try to get a picture. That's not so good. It was a good picture though. It was good. I lived to tell the tale. Okay. So joy is to contemplate the interior sensory capacities as being like empty aggregations. So a little bit of philosophical language here, because no one talks like this. But what do we mean by this? This is a teaching about renouncing practice that don't benefit you. Things that don't lead to enlightenment. Our lives are rather full. And to make space for practice, we need to move some things out of the way, so to speak. During the Buddhist time, if you were leaving home and becoming a monk or nun, you were devoting all of your time to practice. These days, we have much busier lives. Many of us may be working from home or taking new precautions to continue to work or study. And we may find that we are busier than ever because we don't have a distinction between work time, lifetime, home time, family time, any of these times. It's just a blur. So this is about finding practices that are not helpful for us and kind of weeding those out and making time and space for practice. It's a type of self-cultivation. It's important to cultivate ourselves before we attempt to cultivate others. So we have this Bodhisattva vow in the background. that says, oh, we really need to consider compassion towards all living beings. But how do we do that if we don't have kind of the awareness of our own schedule, our own day-to-day needs, and we can't build in time for our practice? So how do we maintain the compassion to accept all the difficulties in life? So we have to be, put some effort into seeing what's necessary and not necessary. I often hear or am asked, how do I find the time to meditate? And it was more, maybe better advice before everyone went to streaming and things like this, but I would, usually recommend, take out one sitcom or one, 30-minute TV show and replace that time with your practice. That sitcom is really only 20 minutes because it's 10 minutes of commercials. So maybe start with just the commercial period, right? 10 minutes. And I think if you go and, you watch whatever show you used to watch, this was, again, more relevant when everyone was watching TV at the same time. I've got to update my examples. You realize it's not a huge amount of time and we can find it, but we have to look at our schedule, look at our day-to-day activities and give consideration to it. Right, so what's next on the list? Sure. I should have numbered them, so I don't know how many there are, but these are all the steps to joy. If we wrote a book called The Steps to Joy, then we'd probably have plenty of money to fix up the temple. So joy is to maintain one's intention for enlightenment in all situations. So always maintaining your intention. I like the language here because sometimes we will be successful, sometimes we won't be, but we should try to maintain our intention. We don't intend to do or say many of the things that happen in our lives, and we may feel regret, but we should always try to keep that in mind. So it's a type of maintenance, maintaining our vow, recalling our vow in the midst of very difficult situations. So recalling that vow sometimes can bring us additional energy or power when we feel powerless. Even if we can't fully actualize it in the moment, it may bring us some type of ability to reflect. So joy is maintaining our intention. Joy is also to benefit sentient beings. So how can you be happy? What's the key skill for happiness and joy in your life? It's to help others, right? The key way to cultivate joy and find happiness is to help others. So the secret here, the real key secret to joy is giving. So the more you give, the more of you give, the happier you will feel. Of course, that giving has to be in balance. So the same way, if you look at the kind of the order of the list, we have to take stock of how much time do we have. So let's say we are the hypothetical single person who comes home from work at 5:30 and watches TV nonstop until 11 and then goes to sleep. So maybe we have more time to remove a sitcom than the parent of 5 children who, if they're lucky, has the opportunity or the time to watch that sitcom with their family. So for them, right, the calculus is different. That is actually family time. That's time they need to spend. So we have to really, again, take stock of our life. So maybe the giving there is, giving their time and attention to their family in a more focused manner. Maybe for someone else, it's, someone running a company. Maybe it's getting to know the names of the employees and a little bit more about their family and background. So it's always different. So it's not that we suddenly have to overwhelm ourselves with goals and obstacles that are beyond our ability. It's to first take stock, right? And then I think if we do that stock taking, we can see, okay, this particular activity isn't really 100% necessary, or I won't miss that, so I can use that time to give in some way or other. This is key. We have to be realistic and have balance. So next up, joy is to revere teachers. This one, I think from a Western perspective, we don't necessarily have as much of a tradition to hold teachers in as high a regard as in other parts of the world. But I think this is one we can benefit from and we should borrow. It's worth noting, I'm sitting here in a teaching role suggesting that you revere teachers. Well, how convenient is that? So here I don't mean me. It's not self-serving. Rather, it's to learn from the example of teachers. So I'll tell you a story as an example. Just before the pandemic started, so right at the beginning of March, before we got kind of shelter-in-place, shutdown orders, and I think when a lot of us thought this was just something that wasn't quite here in our country yet, one of my professors passed away. And this particular professor was instrumental in me getting into graduate school. And when I toured the school on a random day, it wasn't an organized tour, he ran into me in the library, and he was in jeans and a t-shirt, and I didn't know who he was. And he volunteered to just show me around, answer questions. And that was like a Saturday afternoon. And I think Monday I got a call saying, oh, Professor so-and-so said they ran into you, and we should admit you, so expect a letter. I was like, oh, wow. And all through school, he was much beloved by students because he was available, friendly, very open, and filled with resources if you needed them. So he passed away unexpectedly. He wasn't very old. But I went to the viewing because I thought that we'd better actually have a chance to talk to the family. And I related the story of, him kind of running into me, and told his children that, and his wife. And, I think that was impactful for them. They knew people cared about them, but, taking the time to express those feelings is an example, right? You take joy in revering your teacher, remembering them. For myself, every teacher that's contributed to my understanding of the Buddhist teaching, I have a deep regard for. And in our own tradition, when you go to a Shingon temple, you'll see Kobodaishi is most often the main image in Shingon temples here in the United States, and larger temples, you will always see his image enshrined. And from the perspective of a lineage, our own teacher gives us an example of a profound spiritual exertion and mastery. Right? This is a model that we're trying to emulate, but also that same model shows incredible kindness, sensitivity, and attention to, things outside the monastery. Kobodaishi was a great poet, very interested in government, worldly affairs, giving advice to leaders, scientific discoveries, things that could help and be helpful to people. So I think when we reflect on great models in that way, it gives us encouragement as to how we should live and things that we find beneficial in our life and, what we really hold, to be dear and special. So for this way, we should see the importance of revering teachers. Up next, joy is the exquisite practice of charity. Extensive practice. Extensive here. Most of us think that this is a call to give money. Actually, in Buddhism, that's the least important thing. Spirituality is asking us here to give of ourselves, to give our time, our efforts, our best effort, to give attention, listening, sharing, giving shelter. One of the great examples from the Buddha's own life is the giving of fearlessness. If people aren't in fear, they are truly empowered to do some great things. So when can we give that? By joining a cause, supporting a viewpoint. It can be as simple as speaking up at dinner or a meeting when someone else's viewpoint isn't listened to. It can be very small. It could be taking in a foster child. Whatever our means are, we have to all consider that we are in different positions. But the extensive practice of charity, we should try, right? Because we have joy, look, where can I help? Where can I give? And be happy about it. Wish I could do like split screen, then I wouldn't have to switch back and forth. Joy is the firm maintenance of the precepts. Does that sound boring? So you should be asking why. Why does joy have anything to do with the firm maintenance of precepts? I generally like to use big examples that are probably not happening to you right now. So thanks to tabloid news and variety of entertainers and celebrity type folks, you can tell and you can see when they make mistakes, it's all over the news. And I think it has to be tremendously even more embarrassing when whatever mistake they made is on the nightly news. So I don't imagine that brings them joy. So here with precepts are the more we try to act in accordance with our spiritual ideals, the less drama we will have, and therefore the more joy. So the other side of that would be the more we are susceptible to certain activities, the more power people may have over us. And that may put us in a position where we don't feel joy. So that's I think another good example. If we get far enough tonight, I'll give you another example of that. But for now, we'll move along because this is a long list. Okay. What's next? Joy is forbearance impliability. Forbearance? Forbearance here is patient self-control. So if we know someone who seems to not have self-control, probably, if we think about that, somebody will come to mind. So most often it's words. People just, whatever they're thinking comes out of their mouth. They don't have a lot of self-control with regard to their statements, or they'll explode on someone. They might have a short fuse, a hot temper. And as a result, they may spend a lot of time making up for it, apologizing. And we may know someone who falls into this category often. I think this is the most common example. So this patient forbearance means that we're less likely to find ourselves in that position as often. And as if you recall any time that you've personally had to apologize for saying something you didn't mean, or you regret saying, if we could go back, turn back the time, we'd be a lot happier. So joy is the vigorous accumulation of good roots. So what do we mean by good roots? Are we talking about planting roses and having good root stocks? What are we talking about? From a spiritual perspective, we are talking about what happens next, either as a result of this life and the next life, or what happens tomorrow. So the Buddha said, if you want to know your future, look at what you're doing today. Accumulate good roots. So this is a list, it's a guide for joy, right? Giving, morality, etc. These things lead to joy. Not storming the Capitol and live streaming yourself leads to you not being arrested by the FBI, right? So that's joyful. I was not arrested by the FBI. I feel very happy. So this is the accumulation of good roots, right? So very, very simple. The more we engage with things that are in accordance with our spiritual path, the more we avoid kind of negative experiences. Joy is a lack of disturbance in meditation. So here's where I think very practically, if you look at spiritual practice recommendation for morality and particular behavior, yes, it's good to be good. Yes, it's good to treat others with respect. But we're never going to be able to sit down and meditate and get through our spiritual practice if we constantly have in our mind, we're looking over our shoulder, or, we can't get out of our head the thing that we did that was negative. When I first read this, I always remembered the story of the great Japanese swordsman Musashi. And it said that he never really slept and he never took a bath because he was always waiting for someone to attack him, right? So if we live a life where our actions invite attack all the time, then we're on edge ourselves. So how do we avoid being disturbed in our meditation so we can actually achieve the calm abiding? It's living a life that doesn't, leave a trail of things following us when we're wondering, when is that thing gonna kind of pop up again? Our sleep is better, our health is better. All of these things improve as a result of not being, having these kind of disturbances. Okay. Our list of joy continues. Joy is to transcend the defilements in wisdom. So what defiles wisdom should be the question. So first, it's the opposite of all the things we've named already, right? So doing the opposite of everything on the list is something that defiles wisdom. Why is it here in the list? Why does it get listed here? It's good to rationalize things, right? Or I should say, we are good at rationalizing things. We are good at saying, well, I did this because of that, or there were special circumstances, and well, I'll do that just this one time, it won't hurt anyone. It supports a lot of activities that we do, but we don't think necessarily about the consequences to ourself, our mind. So when we have to be realistic about things that are in the category of self-harm. And there's a variety of these things. So we sometimes think they have to be very dramatic, but they can be as simple as, not getting enough sleep because we're stressed out and failing to take proper food, and all these things pile up, and then we start to cover up one behavior with another, and then we can't find our own wisdom. We can't find our own calm and peace. So the steps to joy may seem boring, but they are satisfying because we don't have so many things to fix later. So that's one of the keys. Joy is to disseminate bodhicitta. So this is a joy of cultivating virtue, never giving up on others, but also holding the idea that we want to eventually share this practice, our joy, with others. So this is not a silent exercise. Spiritual practice isn't something we do in silence. Spiritual practice is something we can do out loud. We don't have to label it religious or Buddhist. We can just not take part in people's negative speech. We can just not pile on when someone opens the door. We can not speak ill of others when we're in the company of, when that's happening. It can be very powerful, right? So how you practice can be very subtle, but practicing bodhicitta or compassion in this way is really important. So much mouse clicking. Okay, this is my new teaching life. Joy is the subjugation of the host of Maras. So Maras in traditional Indian thinking, there's the one big Mara, the one kind of big devil, demon, menacing person that will disturb you. But there are also many small ones, all the ways that they manifest in distraction and temptation. So subjugating the host is subjugating our obstacles, or as we see here, our susceptibility to them. Right? We're susceptible to them by not practicing virtue. I'll give you an example. I mentioned my friend earlier. When he switched jobs, his former boss made these recommendations about business activities he should engage in to make more money. A mutual friend had accepted one of these business, in air quotes, business arrangements with the same person. And it didn't work out so well. It involved a loan under kind of shady circumstances, and it put a lot of pressure on him and his family. So he was working extra to try to pay the loan, and it put pressure on his business. He almost lost his business. He couldn't complain because the nature of the agreement was not totally legal. So he had nowhere to go. It's not like he could go to the bank and say, you charged me double last month. What's going on? This person would just call and say, this month you need to pay me more, or the loan is now bigger than it was. And so this kind of host of Maras, we don't recognize sometimes when we're cutting corners, that it might really backfire. Or we may think we are giving up opportunities that others are engaged in, but we're avoiding kind of, losing sleep and all the stress that come with other ways of doing things. So often I tell people it's just not worth it. So in the long run. Joy is the eradication of the afflictions. Of course, right? It's just sort of self-explanatory. When we're not afflicted with really strong emotions, when we probably all had heartache, been very angry with someone, very frustrated, very dissatisfied with our current situation. And when we get past that, it's like a breath of fresh air, right? The sun has finally come out from behind the clouds. So of course we feel joy, right? It's sort of obvious, but sometimes we need to see that information outlined for us so we understand how it works. Joy is the purification of the countries of the Buddhas. So does this mean you have to travel around to all the different Buddha countries sweeping the floor? No. So in Shingon, we say the goal of spiritual practice is to make this world, here and now, the esoterically adorned pure land of the Buddha. So not waiting until later, not waiting until after death. There is no enlightenment without this world. There is no enlightenment in spiritual practice apart from this world. So we don't see a separation. So by practicing now, by practicing with the benefit of others in mind, we are cultivating that sort of spiritual awakening at every moment. It's not something we have to wait to do. We shouldn't think of it as something that, oh, that comes after, or I'm waiting for my reward. That's not the right perspective. Joy is ornamentation of the place of enlightenment. So where is the place of enlightenment? That's our first question. This very moment is the place of enlightenment. This space, your home, your life, what is it ornamented with? Right? What have you decorated your life with? So if you look at this list, it's recommending that you decorate it with virtue, practice, the delicate scent of the finest incense. Maybe if you have it, but you don't have to. But more importantly, to decorate your space with the kind words, the supporting of others. Sometimes we wait to see this too late, right? In this role, I have the opportunity, I will say, sometimes to do funerals, and I remember specific ones by the way people were eulogized and the words that they used to describe people and the memories that they brought up and times that the person touched their life. And it's always the people who were the kindest, that always had a kind word to say, who always, were patting the person on the back in their tough times, was always present for them. These are the people, you just see the appreciation. So this is the type of ornamentation that we're suggesting. But sometimes, we wait too late to recognize it. So don't wait too late. Don't put it off. It's something that we can practice all the time. Joy is to hear the profound Dharma without fear. Isn't that interesting? Hearing it without fear. Why would we hear it with fear? Hearing it without guilt, without fear, without threats, right? I'm not here telling you, follow the Dharma or else this will happen to you, or, you will wake up and something bad will happen, or, you better do it now. This is your last chance. That's not our style. You can see these signs though. If I drive certain parts of the state, I'll see you must do it this way. This is the only way, or else, the other place is really hot, so you better get it straight now. It's kind of threatening billboards telling me what religion is better. So real joy is hearing the Dharma without fear. We don't proselytize. I don't stand on the corner, have you heard the Buddhist teaching, and here's a pamphlet. We don't do that because there's an undercurrent of threat in the offer of religion. If I do that, then I'm saying, whatever you're doing now isn't good enough, so you need to do what I say, right? Whatever path you're on, young man, wherever you're walking to, that's the path to, punishment. So you better turn towards my path. So we don't pull people in with subtle threats of violence. We probably don't think about it that way. But when I was in college, I remember we had the campus square. We had the campus preacher. He would get out he actually had a milk crate. It was kind of a box, and he was standing there. And I'll never forget, maybe my junior year or something. And I was walking across campus, and I couldn't hear what he was saying, but as I got closer, he was like, "It's not Confucius. It's not Zarathustra." And then he looked right at me and he goes, "It's not Buddha." How did he know? And so then he went on to, tell me the right path. So it's shocking. So we don't practice in that manner. We don't pose questions like, "Will you be with your loved ones in the afterlife? What will happen after you die?" This is sort of violent. So the Dharma, joy is hearing the Dharma without fear. And the teaching should never be cloaked in fear. If it is, maybe change buildings. What it should be cloaked in is, let's all look at ourselves and see where we can improve so that we can be of help and service to others, so we can share our joy. with our neighbors, not go out and share fear with our neighbors. Joy is to associate with fellow trainees. Oh, you're doing that right now. I apologize. It's virtual. That's probably the safest at the moment. We will, when it's safe, I think there's going to be a big party. But being here with like-minded people, associating with them, gathering together, this is joy. It's joy because, you know, one of the most difficult things in life is to have, you know, questions, ideas, perspectives, and not have anyone to share them with, feeling like you are alone in your endeavors. So we do this with everything. If you have a hobby, you find other people who are interested in your hobby. Joy is for one's mind to be without hindrance in the midst of those who are not one's fellow trainees. So this is one of the classic Buddhist examples of what is suffering. Suffering is to be with people you don't want to be with. Suffering is to be away from people that you want to be with. So when do you feel sad? During a pandemic, when maybe you can't be near family because it's not safe. When do you also feel sad? During a pandemic, when you're forced to stay with people you don't want to be with. I'm going to call this, though, the toxic environment problem. So what happens when you have to go to a place where those around you are incompatible with your worldview or even your practice, or the place itself is odious, right? Maybe you really need the job, so you can't quit, but the people you work with are toxic. You can't change your environment so quickly. How do you maintain your joy when those around you seem intent on destroying your joy? You feel every day like the thing that seems to make them happiest the most is crushing my happiness. And I think the key here is to maintain your mind. So it's actually a key practice or method in Buddhism, Dharani, mantra practice, a method of maintaining focus. I'll never forget, many years ago, I was in Hawaii and I accompanied someone to the hospital, and I was walking down the hallway and I noticed one of the doctor's office, he actually had a small scroll for the Ajikan meditation on the wall. And I thought, oh, that's brilliant, right? It's not an overt religious symbol. It's just a Sanskrit letter. It's not going to upset anyone. But I said, oh, I can see probably through all the stress and all the difficulty and all the things that you have to deal with, he's able to take a moment and practice. So we can, do the same. If we have my larger juzu here, but sometimes we wear the wrist beads. If we remember why they're there and reflect on our practice, instead of letting our mind wander into, these people are toxic and I want to be away from them all the time, we bring our mind back to, what our practice should be. This list, I said, comes from the Molokarti Sutra. And in the very beginning of the sutra, we see Vimalakirti go everywhere. There's no place he doesn't go. He goes to, seedy establishments. He goes to places that are, society would say are very lovely, fine. He associates with people who are at the lowest levels of society and the highest levels of society. We shouldn't be afraid to go to places, but we have to keep our mind firm. And that's part of our practice. The more we can keep our mind firm, the better off we'll be. But we have to be aware of the toxic environment. So next on the list, joy is to defend against evil friends. Is that an oxymoron to have evil friends? I'll say these are the toxic person problem, or the frenemy, the people that appear to be your friend but are really working to undermine you. So these can be, again, sometimes it's hard to get away from them. Sometimes it's hard to recognize them. Sometimes it's hard to recognize when people are not good for you, not healthy. So look at what activities they're trying to bring you into. Are they healthy, positive activities, or is it always the phone call and the complaint? So we need to be, again, like good listening friends, but we don't need to engage in the negativity ourselves. We can say, oh yeah, I understand that must be really hard, but we don't have to say, oh yeah, I recognize that Bob and Jake and John are really horrible people. Yeah, you're right, we should do something. So it's subtle. You can be a good friend but not be pulled into the toxic environment. It takes time. It's a challenge, but we should give thinking to that. Oh yeah, somebody asked for the PDF of the list, so I will upload, or I will share it in the chat. Let's see, how do I do that?
Thank you, Sensei.
Oh, no problem. Give me 1 second. Just put this up immediately, so I apologize for not listing it. There we go. Okay, shared that list. I will put it back up on screen just in case, because I know some people are on phones and it doesn't show up. You can't download it that way. So when we have the toxic friend problem, the other side is the good friend. I'll mention one other idea for that kind of toxic environment and the toxic friend problem. The loving kindness meditation is a really good practice because sometimes we don't have the answer or the energy right away to deal with it, or we may not feel that we're ready to face or change our approach in some of those situations. So to avoid generating negative feelings, we could try to share loving kindness with the situation and the people involved. I think that's a good focus. And again, from the Bodhisattva vow, you're thinking to not give up on them. And not giving up on them means, recognizing that we've all had tough times. It's likely that the people who are in the situation that you find difficult are actually having a tough time. So what we're actually seeing are manifestations of an illness, so to speak. So if we think of it that way, it's sometimes helpful. So obviously the opposite, joy is to associate closely with good friends. Right? So when we are with good friends, we're having a much better time. We're feeling joy. But here, by good friends, traditionally it's the Kalyana Mitra, the good and wise advisors, Dharma friends, meaning, especially you'll see this in the Molokarti, friends who can give us real advice, deep advice rooted in the teaching, who will tell us, you should go back there and give them a piece of your mind. Rather, they'll say, you should practice compassion. You should try to find some patience. Maybe you need to take a break. Maybe, try these positive strategies. So a friend capable of explaining and sharing with you, the teaching. So obviously these are not as easy to find, but we should try to draw close to, more positive people, associate with those kind of friends. Let's see. We are almost at the, oh good. Let's finish the list for tonight, then that would be helpful. Let's see. So joy is to be happy and pure in mind. as my teacher would say, easy to say, very difficult to do. So this isn't just a statement, but it's an indication or exhortation to practice the things that came before in the list. So the result of those practices is to be happy and pure in mind, rather than to be filled with anger and frustration over the actions and words of others. So the specific practice that's recommended is the four Brahma Viharas, right? The four types of mind that should be developed in meditation. So specifically though, loving kindness and empathetic joy. So seeing the virtue of others and rejoicing in it. So you can, I think, empathetic joy is a good one, and it's easy to practice, and it's easy to do socially distanced. So I'll talk about it a little bit. And it's taking joy from seeing others experiencing joy. So although our area had a hardship with snow, one thing that you can really count on people in the Portland area is they're going to do something kind of hilarious with it. So I saw many people skiing through the neighborhood, kids on snowboards, finding whatever hill they could in the middle of the street, parents out there, flagging down cars, letting know kids are playing in the snow. As difficult as it was in some areas, people went out and enjoyed it. I saw someone make a 12-foot tall snowman. And even though most of the snow was melting, of course, that huge snowman is still there. And everyone who drives by smiles. So empathetic joy is whenever you see someone else experiencing joy, you try to share. You see a child happy, you allow their joy to infuse you. You see, someone coming out of the Apple store with the new iPhone and they're excited. You share in their joy. You see, anyone experiencing joy, you share in it. And this practice doesn't take away from anyone else. You can sit in the park, you can sit in traffic and watch people and share in their joy rather than, why is everybody else happy? Don't they know what's happening in my life? You try to share in their joy. So there's always an opportunity. And so empathetic joy is that way. And then in turn, once you've, absorbed that joy, think, I want to share this joy with that toxic environment or that toxic person or that person I have this difficulty with. I hope they can share. I hope they can find joy in their life. And you actually actively think that rather than the opposite, because the more we think the opposite, the more we're creating sort of that pathway in our mind where the first thing that comes to mind with regard to that person or situation is something negative. So we have to actively, try to undo some of that practice. Okay. Last few of these. Joy is to cultivate the immeasurable factors of enlightenment. So those are some of the ones I was talking about, but specifically, this is a exhortation to keep studying. So the Buddhist teaching includes infinite numbers of practices and methods. There is no end to the study. It's something we do on a daily basis. There's no end to our experiences. We're always having new situations, changes in life, struggles, and our evolving understanding of the teaching informs that perspective. So the person who read this teaching last year is not the person who read it today. So it says, these are the Bodhisattvas Joy in the Dharma. So by these, it means the whole long list, of course, that we've gone through. It's a spiritual path. The spiritual path isn't boring, listless, sad, and drab. It's filled with all the joys. And if we think, what about pizza? I didn't see pizza on the list. Pizza brings me joy. Where's pizza? Um, joy isn't false joy or imposed joy. Joy is, you can go to your pizza place. You can take joy in seeing other people eat pizza. You can take joy from watching the person make the pizza. You can take joy in knowing that, in the midst of a pandemic, when small businesses are struggling, by getting takeout or having your food delivered and still patronizing the business, that shop owner can continue their business. And there's all opportunity to share joy in that way. Telling them, hey, I'm still happy to see you open, and how's business, and inquiring is a way of sharing joy. All of these things are joy. Is there a specific list? Yes. So there are actually, the Bodhisattvas practices for obtaining joy. So mindfulness, investigation of mental phenomena, energy, right, vigor, joy, tranquility, concentration, equanimity, and those are, of course, supported by the 5 practices: faith, energy, mindfulness, concentration, and wisdom. So they all are supposed to work together and try to help, us recognize when we are kind of losing our grip on joy, and all the many opportunities that we have to, get it back. However, difficult our day is, we can still share and practice this empathetic joy. We can see other people's happiness and try to use it to remind ourselves. We can have happiness, and when we see someone else sad, we could try to, I wish that person, that they have joy. By doing so, it changes us. It changes how we experience the situation. It completely transforms our life day to day. So that's our list for joy. And I've been talking for too long, so are there any questions on the teaching this evening?
Christine here. The list, as you explained it, it made so much sense, because when you look at it from, I lack the better word, balanced mind, these are just good ways of living, good living. And how often, like somebody like myself, I forget these things. I run out there in the field and I do whatever, forgetting that, there's certain things I need to do and there's certain things I shouldn't do. Thanks.
I think it's helpful to remind ourselves of these, because I'm guilty of it. I'll find some academic paper on some very obscure topic of Buddhism, and like, oh, this is fascinating. And I will always then try to ask, how does this help me or someone else when they're at the grocery store, or when they've had a difficult day, or when they're dealing with grief, or all manner of things. So I think one of the beautiful things about the Buddhist teaching is how interconnected the concepts are. But because it's so much information, or it's so detailed, sometimes we don't see the constant interconnection. So from time to time, it's helpful to reflect on joy, something that we should be seeing the teaching as. We should see it as happy, not this static, dusty, collection of teachings that we were trying, very hard to study, and like losing sight of daily life. It has to be part of daily life too. So that's important. Right? Oh, loving kindness meditation. We should probably actually, it's one of the questions, practice that as well. So again, it's a way of wishing loving kindness towards others. We actually mentioned this a little bit last week during the talk about the Lotus Sutra. So Maitreya, the Buddha of the future, his name Maitri actually means this kind of loving kindness. So how do we, share the benefits of our spiritual practice with others? And it can be actual, you literally physically do something for someone. But there are so many situations where, we're unable to help others. So I'll give you an example. Someone sent me an article this week. There's a small town in Texas, and the governor or mayor, sorry, the mayor of that small town, looking at the people who were without power, and many of them didn't have water because of the snowstorm and the temperatures, said people should not ask for government help. They should, fend for themselves, and everyone needs to be self-sufficient. And he didn't care if people were upset by those words. And I just thought how kind of soul crushing it would be when, citizens cannot turn their power back on, right? The utility company has to do that. And many people, their medical devices depend on that. And, everybody has a different capacity, capability. And I can't go comfort everybody who read those words and were hurt by them, but I can, wish them loving kindness and say, in some way, may they find their way out of this. At some point, may they be able to look back on that situation and find meaning in it rather than have anger. And I wish them loving kindness. I wish them a way to have peace in their mind. That practice is more beneficial than me going, okay, that guy's on my list and he's a this and a that, and a, expletive and a bleep and another bleep. That's not helpful for my mind. It's not helpful for finding solutions. So loving kindness can be an actual meditation practice, guided. Sometimes people do it on their own. It can also be aspirations that you wish towards others. It can be, take the form of a prayer. Right? I'm praying for those people and that they will have these benefits in the face of these difficulties. Because when power goes out like that, I don't, my mind actually goes to, I know there are a lot of people with home health devices, and it's a nightmare. How can they get out? How can they get, if you're on oxygen or something, the machine needs power to run, and what do you do? So it's more than discomfort or, not being able to watch Netflix or something. To not see that is very short-sighted. It's sad that we're in a country where people want to say that out loud, especially if they're in a leadership position. So, the whole situation needs loving kindness. It doesn't, there's plenty of people who are going to respond with, let's get our pitchforks and torches and get that mayor. Or there's plenty of other people that are going to say, yeah, that guy's right. And everyone who asks for help is useless. We don't need to be part of that crowd. So, but realistically, naturally, as a human being, we might be shocked by someone expressing that. And so then we have to have that kind of meditative awareness to watch the shock. And before, the shock goes out with the negative words, we can say, oh, let me grab the shock and then channel it into loving kindness rather than, I can't believe that bleep, 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 bleep would say the bleep, bleep kind of thing. Because we actually have that capacity to redirect. And when we do, then we're cultivating the things on the list. Right? We're getting joy. We're seeing solutions. We're seeing, true needs. The true need is obviously our country needs a better power grid. That's more resilient. So that's one. But that's a good question. So one of the questions in the chat is, living in a world where everyone is focused on instant gratification, how do we remind ourselves not to be present in the current moment rather than get caught up with all of the stuff? I think the first step is just slowing down. Everything in our world is fast-paced, and slowing down is a good first step. And slowing down can be, taking a break from social media, taking a break from TV shows, driving a different way to work, limiting how much time you're on the computer, starting slow and recognizing that all the things that we think or thought we needed, we don't necessarily need. We can live without. And then, asking the difference between need and want. It's very easy to buy things these days. You just click. I remember some years ago, people would, freeze their credit cards. So they'd actually put it in water and put it in the freezer and freeze it. And then this is like back in the 80s, early 90s. And then, they'd have to defrost it to get them to go shopping. So then they'd have to think about, do I really want to buy that thing? So just slowing down and asking, do I really need this item, or do I want it because I'm frustrated or I'm unhappy today, or all these different things. So slowing is, I think, one of the important things. Slowing our driving, slowing our how we obtain food. Try to cook. Try to assemble food. Try to eat in a more mindful manner. Don't sit in front of the TV and eat. Sit at the table. Don't have the TV on while you're eating. Just slowing down and being more reflective. All of those things are good first steps. None of this is going to happen overnight. None of this is going to click and suddenly like, oh, I read it once and it's fine. It takes time, but it's worth it because the long term, we have this experience of joy. And for myself, I recognize it when I go out and I see people really struggling with certain situations, and I can say, oh, I remember when I struggled with that situation, or I remember when I was in that, that place. And then I try to remember when was the last time, and I don't necessarily remember. And I recognize that the absence of those stressors, struggles, drama, toxic environments is joy. So we have to also spend time, expressing gratitude for what we're not experiencing. That is also joy. All the things that I am not experiencing that I used to experience, I feel tremendous gratitude for. But I have to remind myself of that. This week, I had to be thankful that, I had electricity, because many people were messaging me and they did not have electricity. So I had to say, I have true gratitude for being able to, I have gratitude for that simple thing. But I don't think about it normally. So it's an opportunity.
I have a follow-up question.
Yes.
So with what you were saying with slowing down and like unplugging, what if while you're doing that, you feel like you're isolating yourself from the rest of the world in a sense.
So you don't have to, you don't have to throw the phone away. You can just, for example, the last few weeks I've been very busy, so I haven't gone on Facebook. I'm usually just posting updates for the temple and things, but I haven't even looked, and I recognize I didn't miss it, and there was nothing helpful there for me anyway. But then a good friend of mine from college messaged me and just inquired about how I was doing in the snow, and so I took the time to respond, and that was nice. I was still in contact with people. So it's like, I think anything we can definitely do with less. All the examples I give are usually apply to me. So I try to spend less time in front of the monitor and working on the computer. So I actually move some of things back to paper. So I have the Lotus Sutra on PDF. I'm trying to use the book because it slows me down. That's a choice. So the world is frantic. So if I'm doing something, I try to find ways to slow down and have less distractions. So we have to work on that. The world is not going to change. We have to modify ourselves as we go through it. But we don't, the advice is not crawl under a rock or hide in a cave. It's just try to reduce. Decide. Okay, I usually use social media or email. I'm on the phone or whatever, but to start off with 2 times a week, at 7 o'clock or whatever, I'm just not going to use it anymore for the rest of that evening. Or I'm not going to check, messages or anything after a certain time. It will help your sleep. You will feel refreshed. I remember a time when, people did not expect instant responses on email. And now, if there's not an instant response, sometimes people are upset, but it's okay. It's totally okay. It's okay to limit, some of those things. It's okay to take time for yourself. Reading, I highly recommend. We should all, in the midst of a pandemic, pick up books again and spend time with them, because I will tell you, after the world sort of opens up again, we will have even less time. So as much as, sadly, I can't tell you how many Zoom meetings I have now. I'm engaging with people this way. We should take that opportunity, go for a walk, read a book, stop and smell the flowers, literally. It is helpful. It will change our outlook. Every time I recommend it, I recommend people just go for a walk. I've actually pushed people out and said, go walk now. And they come back, oh, I do feel better. Even if it's 15 or 20 minutes, but we need that. But I think especially in our current situation, because our only contact is electronic devices, and that's how I'm reaching all of you. After this, turn it off and go. Even if you just stand outside and get fresh air for 5 minutes, even if it's super frigid, it's refreshing. So we all need to just slow down, but start slow. Start slow. All of this world is addictive, so you can't just stop it. Just slowly back off, and then cherish that quiet time that you've created. Cherish that space that you've created, and then you'll want to protect it and build it. But if we jump in too dramatically, it's a shock. and we'll just run away. But slow and steady.
Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. Any other questions, thoughts? Just looking to see if I missed anything in the chat. Okay. So as much as I talked about the simple things like joy and whatnot, we will probably pick up on some more explanatory components of the teaching again when we have the introduction class. But I think it's helpful to reflect on something we all need, and that is to remember and reflect on joy and happiness. So remember, even if we're not feeling it when we see it in others, we can share in it. We just have to remind ourselves to share in it. Take joy when you see others experiencing joy. That's a good first step. So we will dedicate merit tonight to all of those. Obviously, we're still in the midst of an ongoing pandemic, but especially all of those affected by wild weather and storms and who are without power and heat. It's a tremendous struggle to try to get through the modern world. We don't really have backups, for those eventualities for many people. So it's quite daunting. So if you join me in dedication of merit, dedicate the merit to benefit of all sentient beings so that they, together with us, may equally realize awakening. Namo Daishi Henjo Kongo, Namo Daishi Henjo Kongo, Namo Daishi Henjo Kongo. Thank you, everyone, for joining us this evening, and we may see some of you tomorrow night as we continue our exploration of the Lotus Sutra. And then in 2 weeks, we continue the intro class. So in the meantime, please stay warm, please stay safe. Practice joy, feel it, it's there. We just have to reach out and grab it. So in this case, don't feel bad about you're grasping. So grasp onto joy because it's available for all of us. So have a good night. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Sensei.
Thank you.